Okay, hello again. Um, Moving on to the second part of the introduction to Unity. Uh, this time we're going to talk a little bit about how to set materials, make things look a particular way, adding textures, adding lighting, also introducing packages and how we can use things that have already been made by other people, which is a big part of the benefit of using something like Unity. And also getting into a little bit of how to design terrains. This is a little bit of a deeper dive into Unity, and you'll have to sort of put up with me learning how the new version has done some things and also dealing with limitations with the previous material. So hold tight, we'll get through it together. Great. So at this point, you should have already made kind of a project before. It should kind of look like a snowman. Doesn't really have to. You'll see my project isn't really any farther along than probably many of yours. So let me actually go ahead and pull that up. So assuming I've shut everything down, so I'm assuming that you're just getting started again. To get Unity up and running again and opening up your project, you just launch the Unity Hub, and that will pop up the Unity Hub, and you can see these projects that are here. So let's pop open the Snowman demo from before, and that'll launch Unity. One thing that I've done that you'll see is I've actually set up for usage of a different IDE, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means in a second. But one thing that you'll notice is that the project will show up and the configuration of your window will be the same as that when you left it. And so for the most part, things should look about exactly the same as when we quit previously. So none of this is really applicable to the online class, but if you'd like, please start posting pictures to the Slack, sorry, to the Discord of your images and things like that, specifically on IGME202, not on 309. Please do not spam the general, or I will wag my finger at you. So let's get started. Let's jump in a little bit into materials, textures, and lighting. So with materials, just like before, we're going to create materials as objects in the project. So to create a new material, let's make a material that kind of looks like snow. And so we'll pop over here and let's go into our project here and jump into the materials folder. And we're actually going to create it in the assets folder versus doing it in the project. And you'll see why in a moment. So you right click here and you create, and you'll have a lot of options, but one of them is material. So let's choose that. And let's rename this to snow, right? That doesn't look like snow so much as it looks like a gray piece of plastic, but for now, we'll put up with it. And we'll choose the albedo to be white. And what does that mean? In the inspector, you'll see that there's a bunch of different options that you can mess with, one of which being the color. So if I wanted to change it to red, you can see down in the bottom right, this sort of material will update based on how you are changing this. So this is kind of like a preview of what this material will look like when you actually apply it to your scene. So right now, white kind of looks grayish, but we'll talk a little bit about why that is in a moment. And yeah, now we've got sort of a snow material that we can then use in our project. So how do you apply the material? You can have a couple options. You can either drag it, you can apply it more manually. So like, for example, I can take the snow, I can apply it to the plane, or not, apparently. All right, I guess I have to do it this way. I can apply it to the ground, apparently not either. Oh no, I guess that's the color that we have. So this is actually has been applied, which is strange. And you'll notice that this is the case because if we change the color, then only those things with the color will update. So let's quickly ask the question, well, why is this look yellow? And that's probably because of the color of the sun. You'll notice that the color of the sun is a strange color. So let's change that to white. And you'll notice everything will be white in response to that changing, which is a funny little thing. But all right, we'll deal with these things later. Let's move this up higher for now. So There's other ways to apply the material. Let's change the color of the snow just to know that we're applying it to the right thing. So let's do that. You can drag and drop. You can even go in here and then choose a material. You could do that. Select material, and then you can go and now find the material that you want to use. Oops. Not what we want. We want select material. All right. There we go. Never mind. Just drag and drop for now. That's fine. Great. You can actually see you can actually change the material in here as well. But we'll talk a little bit about that. So now we change the materials all back to white. Great. So our world is a little bit dark. We want to add some light. Well, we already have a light, so let's delete this one for now. It's nothing now. And let's put the light like we did before. So right click and you create a light by hitting directional light, and I'll create it for you in kind of a random spot. Notice that the light that it creates is now white. I don't know why it wasn't white in the first place, but there we go. We can rotate it, and we can kind of change the direction that it's looking. So this is one option. We can rotate it this way. You'll notice that the light responds. Direction of the light is kind of unique in that it doesn't really matter where it's located because of the fact that you'll see direction. It only takes direction into consideration with the lighting calculation. And so here you can kind of see when it's pointing. Let's make it a bit more aggressive. Say it's pointing out like that. You'll notice that the light behaves like it's coming from that direction. If I rotate it about, you'll see that specular highlight kind of rotate about. But let's make it more like a traditional light source as you would find in the middle of the day. What's cool about Unity 2 is it creates this skybox, I'm sure you've noticed, that will respond to the sort of sun. So now it's nighttime because the sun's below us. You can kind of see over here, you have that nice Rayleigh, what's called Rayleigh scattering. Cool. Let's go down. Cool. Yeah. So now we have a little bit of light. So now let's like make it look like a snowman. Mine doesn't really look like anything. So first off, let's focus. Let's move this up here. Rename this to light. Let's call it sun. And let's focus on our snowman. Let's collapse it. And now we can focus on it. Okay, that's not what I wanted, but fine. First things first, let's make the bottom a little bit bigger than it is. Let's make it 2. And now this is starting to look a little bit more like a snowman. Let's use this as a reference. That next one looks a little bit bigger, but not quite, half the size. So let's go 1.5. That looks about right. And then this maybe even could be a bit, we can move it around a little bit. So let's move this guy up a bit. Let's move this up a bit. And now, sorry, I'm still figuring out all the key combos. Actually, you know what? The head is a little bit like that. And this one could even be a little bit bigger. Just have a little bit of fun. Make it look like you'd want it. You'd want your actual snowman to look in real life. And now it's starting to look a little bit more like a snowman. Those other ones look way cooler than mine, but we'll get there. And let's move it down so it's actually touching the ground. And the way we can do that is we can put on this isomorphic view. And then we can sort of pull it up just so that it's just touching there. Cool. And now you can see the camera. Let's actually take a little bit and move the camera to where we want it so that it's kind of looking straight on at our snowman. There we go. Cool. Oh, hold on. There we go. So, all right, great. Let's get a nice little. In fact, what we can do, this is a good trick. Instead of making it so large, we can make the scene about this big. And we can center our snowman in the middle. The Y we won't mess with. And now, if we click on the plane and hit fit, it gives you a pretty nice sort of scene view. Where's our camera, though? I don't see our camera. So our camera is apparently under the ground, which is no good. There we go. So we can sort of put it there. Cool. Looking all right. That's a good start. Now we want to add some other objects to, give it a little bit of a look and feel. So how about we give it a hat and a face? So first off, let's maybe rotate around so that we can actually see it from the lighted side, or from the side that we're going to see, that we're actually going to look at it from. Cool. So let's add a hat. And so let me do, just like I was doing before, I'm going to create another object. It's going to be a cylinder. That's a little bit big, isn't it? So we're going to just go manually shrink it down. Great. And then we're going to move it up a little bit. And maybe shrink it a little bit more. Or we can shrink it like that. Perfect. We want to give this a different material. And so let's add a new material to do that. So let's do create material, hat material. Let's apply it to here. And this will have a black look, maybe a gray. It's kind of like cool. And now we'll add another 3D object, which is another cylinder, which is a bit big again. Make it small in this direction, make it smaller. Oops. Let's make it smaller in this direction, and then make it taller. And then we can move it. And you'll notice that it's a little bit, it's okay, like, let's go isomorphic so we can actually see what's going on here a little bit better. And let's scale it up a little bit more, and also give it a little bit more width. We can do that by that. And then let's move it so it's not intersecting down. And what's kind of nice here is we can then create an empty object on, no, we cannot do that. Let's create an empty object called hat, and we'll add these two there. So now we want to move the hat. We can do so. In fact, we probably want to zero out this one and then move this down. Let's move the whole thing up so we can actually see what's going on here. So in the future, probably better to just create that initially. And now we've got a snowman with a top hat. I think my top hat's a little bit more realistic. Great. So, cool, but it's a bit boring still. Let's add a face. So let's add a face. 3D object. Let's add sphere, two eyes, which we can make kind of small. 0.2, 0.2, 0.2. And we can just use that hat material because it's about the same. And let's move it. You'll notice I use isomorphic actually pretty commonly. It's a really kind of nice little tool to actually see things as they are. Actually, let me, and then now we can duplicate this, and we can just right click and duplicate. Now we can move this over. There's many other tricks to making things look the way you want them to using this stuff, but I'm going to keep it simple for now, just for my own sanity. Notice it's not quite aligned, but there are better ways to do that. Cool. So now let's just really quickly look. It looks all right, I guess. Let's add a nose, a carrot. Let's see. So to do a carrot, we can sort of use a cylinder that we will then rotate by 90 degrees on the X, and we'll make it a whole lot smaller. Let's take a look at it from the top so we can move it around. And it's not great. There are probably better ways to deal with this. There are probably, this is kind of where you start to get into the limitations of primitives, but it's nice nonetheless. So let's make this just a little bit smaller so that it kind of looks more like a nose. Maybe it's a stick. Let's pretend like that's the case. Cool. Let's create a new material. And let's call this one wood material. And give it sort of a brown. That's it. Great. So just this is the wood material, and we'll give it a brown. And we can apply that to the nose. Awesome. Great. So it's getting kind of, you can do this for effectively all day, which I think is what, you want to do if you're making a video game. Right. Cool. So now that we've got a bit of a snowman, you'll notice that if I select the snowman and I want to move it, it all moves together. So that's kind of talking about the previous thing I was saying in the last lecture, which is these groupings are particularly useful. And so now we actually have like a game. We can play it. Notice that here is the game down here. And we're actually playing a game. Nothing happens, but it's a real game, and it's working. It's a good start. So save your work. Awesome. So what's next is now we want to make it do some things. And the way we do that is by adding packages. We can obviously create all of this stuff from scratch, and we may have to some degree because packages don't always work with every version of Unity. It's kind of a mess, but for the most part, packages are the way that Unity manages and contains either objects, functionality, even entire submodules and applications. And so this is sort of the main way that you add new things to your thing that you haven't created from scratch. So it's particularly powerful. So the way that you add packages in Unity is from what's called the asset store. So let me kind of pop that up. You can get to the asset store either in this way, going from the window to the asset store, or just clicking. So you can see it's pretty common to have this up all the time. And you do need to be signed into your Unity account to access the asset store and download things. You can buy things on the asset store. There are a lot of free things on there as well, so feel free to run around and look at everything that's on there. But we just want a basic character controller. And what I mean by a character controller is in this game, when I'm playing it and I'm doing things like pushing, the key characters, or I'm moving the mouse, nothing happens. And we can either build that all from scratch, or we can download somebody else's that's already been created. And so what we want is we want the standard assets. Now, last I checked, these didn't exactly work the way that we want them to, but that's okay. So the way you find assets is you can either browse and find whatever you want on here, but the standard is, since we know what we're looking for, we can search for the standard assets and then click on that and open it. You'll notice that it's here, all the different things. Here's the thing that we're really after. This is the first person character controller. And now we can hit download. Once you hit that, it will ask you to sign into your account, which for whatever reason it does not have my account. So let me do that. Has to be secure. Great. So now that I've logged in, it will know that I'm logged in, and it will ask me to download it again, which is, welcome to the internet, right? So now it's downloading. This should go pretty fast. Hopefully it's quite small. I might edit this part out of the lecture that I put online. So hang around while this takes place. Actually, I'm going to stop it here, and then I'm going to restart with it. Okay, so now we're back. Now you can see that it's downloaded completely. And once it's downloaded, you can import these assets to your project by clicking the button Import. This will prepare the package. You don't have to import everything. There's no real harm in importing everything, although anything inside of your project will be compiled, and so if there are any weird issues, you might have problems. So if your asset that you're downloading from the store isn't compatible with your version of Unity, sometimes things that you don't care about will create conflict. So it's good hygiene to kind of only add the stuff that you need, and often it'll tell you if there's a conflict, like if you're trying to add something that needs something else. So let's just add in the first-person character that we need, which let's go back here, and we'll find that. Where will we find it? We will find it under Standard Assets, Characters. So where are you? We don't want the sample scenes. Here we go. So we want Sample Assets, Characters, First-person character. Great. And that's all we really need. You can add these other things, but let's for now just add the first-person character, and that's it. Let's import that. Now you'll notice there's already issues, as you can see in the errors down here, which we'll try to deal with because you guys are going to be having this problem too, I'd imagine. But one thing you'll notice is here in the assets folder, you'll see your standard assets and the characters and all of the files therein. So if we try to now play, all compilers have to be fixed, which sucks because we've got like 10 of these errors that seem pretty scary. They don't look like the best errors to have. Let's put this guy down there for now. And we'll deal with that in just a minute. Because we're not about to use the game quite yet. So, we may hit a block at this point with the first-person character controller, and if we're not able to, we will have to create a new version of that thing, and we'll deal with it kind of later in a different way. So let's, in the meantime, talk about terrain, because the reason those other issues are happening has nothing to do with what we're learning in this particular lecture. So Unity has a pretty awesome terrain tool. It's largely using what's called a height map to create a tessellated surface that will then look like a terrain. It's quite effective. This is one of the first kind of techniques that people used to create terrains in video games, because all it takes is a image, like a bitmap, and you can just draw like black and white, and you can create kind of whatever thing you want. So the way you create a terrain, so first off, we kind of fake the terrain with this little plane, so let's get rid of that. And you just go and you create, right-click in your scene, and you create a 3D object that is a terrain. Awesome. And you'll notice, this is quite big. You'll notice this is like the corner in the game. You can see kind of how far it goes, but if I hit F and I fit this to the scene, it's so big, it's like barely even, like there's our little guy down there. So let's go back and fit to our fit to the snowman. Okay, great. So not so good to do that. Neat. All right, let's click on our snowman and fit there. Great. So first things first, we probably want to change the size of it. To do that, let's select the terrain. And then we want to change the terrain itself. So to do that, we go and hit the terrain settings. And the terrain width, we want to change it to 500, the width to 500, length 500, and the height to 600. And so let's do that here. Oops. 600. Great. This didn't really make it that much smaller, but oh, I see. We should actually change it to 100, not 500. Great. And now things should be a little bit smaller. Not that much smaller. We don't want it super tiny. Another thing we can do here is we can position it such that, well, unfortunately, it's kind of created in this weird way where the terrain is set to its 0 point in a way that is not symmetrical. Usually, you'd expect the 0 to be in the middle of the terrain, but that's not the case here. So let's just move it so that our guy is in the middle. A good way to kind of programmatically do this, we made it 100 by 100, so we can go -50 by -50, and now we've got our snowman right in the middle of that terrain. You'll notice that there is no material, that this is what it looks like when there's no material assigned to a thing. So for the time being, let's assign this, oh, I guess not. I guess we cannot assign the material quite yet. Well, we'll talk about it in a minute, I suppose. Great. So choose a brush size, and opacity. So this is kind of the fun part. And you kind of saw me already doing it a little bit. You can kind of create your, let me change this to perspective, which will change this quite substantially. Let's sort of change the way this looks. We have a bunch of different brushes. Let's use this one. And what I can do, I can kind of click and you'll see it create these mounds. And really all I'm doing is, if you think about sort of an underlying image, I'm basically just drawing onto that image with this paintbrush. And it's quite effective. And that's it. And now if you look from the perspective of our camera, I'm going to maximize on place. It's going to maximize everything. Well, I guess we can't even do that. From the perspective of the camera, you can kind of see this really cool, these rolling hills in the background of our snowman. So the really simple kind of height map type of effect, we've gotten some really cool effects very, very, very quickly. You can do some funky things like, whoa, but let's not do that because that's not real. But you can do some really interesting stuff for sure. Let's deal with the material here. So I think we can. Not sure how this has changed. Texture resolutions. All right. Well, for now we have a no material terrain. We'll have to deal with that soon. So, great. Texturing a terrain. Images must be added to a project in order to texture the terrain, or you can search for the textures that you like. So this is what I was kind of trying to do. This is a little bit new to me, but what we can do is we can create a add some images to our terrain, and let's do that. So now we have this folder, images, and I'm going to jump into the project that. Let me do this off screen so I can get to the right folder. And what I'm doing is I'm looking for images that will let me, that are textures of snow and things like that. Because what a terrain does is it kind of interleaves a bunch of these different images to create different styles of, so basically based on the height, you can sort of interpolate multiple different images. So let me pull that up. Okay. Okay, so we've got some different textures that we can use. You can see here, here's a texture of snow. Kind of looks nice and, bumpy. We've got the a little bit more of a rocky thing, and we've got some kind of swirled that we can use for, like almost like a lake, like a frozen lake front, that kind of thing. We even have things that are kind of frozen. This is a little bit different, like if we're trying to use an igloo. And this is a normal map for those igloos, which we'll talk about later. So let's just add all of these, and these meta files are here from a previous project, which I'm pulling these things from. So for the time being, we don't need them. Unity will generate these meta files for you, and so you don't need to add them from prior projects. In fact, it's better that you don't. So I'm going to just pull them, and now you can see immediately, we can see these images here. Now, if you have your own textures, you can download them, but one of the ways to do this, this is a little bit of a, kind of a, call it a, different people have different ways to do it. My favorite is Google Images, right? And you can go into image search, and you can say like snow, texture, 1024, something like that, and you will get like 1024 by 1024 textures of snow. It's that easy. In fact, if you want to do snow bump map, which you'll find this is not something that we're going to talk about yet, but you'll even see snowy bump maps. And there's tools also to create textures and things like that, which we may cover. But yeah, for the most part, Google Image Search is your friend if you do use something. I really recommend going to the actual web page. Sometimes these web pages will have other textures, and you can get a bunch at once, and you can also attribute your actually credit these sources as well. So yeah, Google's your friend, and in particular with regards to finding images. But for now, let's just use these. This is from a previous project that was on which was provided in a previous section of 202. So great. Whoops. So let's go back. Now that we have images in our project, we can now edit the textures that we want to add to our terrain. Okay, and we are back. So I will have to update this particular lecture slide pretty significantly, as the Unity has in 2019 has pretty significantly changed this terrain tool, but It's pretty straightforward. So the way you do it, once you have this set up, in the paint section of the terrain, you can choose raise or lower terrain. That's what we were doing earlier. We can add, whatever the highest mountain you've ever seen. Or you can also click paint texture. And now the way you do this is you actually edit terrain layers. So there's a button here. And you can add a layer, but we don't have any. So if you add it, it'll be empty. So we have to create a terrain layer first. When you do that, you'll see a bunch of different options pop up. So let's start off with snow. And let's select the texture. And now we've got a terrain layer, which we can now draw. We can, everything is the same color. And now when you look at the image provided by the camera, you can actually see that looks a lot more like snow, which is really nice. So what a difference just an image can make. And we also want to add potentially another set of terrains, textures. So let's do that. Let's create another layer that is a flash frozen. Great. And now we can use this plus the brush to kind of create almost like, let's make this a little bit smaller. We can sort of make a little lake in the middle here. It's almost like just drawing. Or you can make it a little bit fuzzy on the edges there. And then we can also, again, do this again and create another layer from this one, which looks a little bit more rocky. So maybe the tops of the mountains are going to be a bit rocky, and we can use kind of like this sort of noisy pattern. Let's make this a bit smaller so we can see what's going on here. We can just sort of add a little bit. As you can see now, we're adding a little bit of, and that's a little bit too much. You can kind of see. So that you can just play with this until you get it to the right thing. And maybe we want to add a little bit of swirled ice. So let's do a add. Let's create this swirled ice one, and we can just add that on top. Oops. And we can kind of mix them in that way, which is kind of fun. So now, if we move up here, we look down, you can see it's like a bunch of different things sort of mixed together. Very cool. So, actually, okay. You can also mess with this a little bit more, and this is important. So you'll notice that there's a lot of tiling in this particular it's sort of frozen one. And so what you can do here is you can actually change the tile settings. So I can change the offset, the size. So I want to make it bigger. You'll notice that it kind of changes sort of how that fits. There are more, there's a lot of different options here. You can also add normal maps and masks, which we'll talk about probably later. And actually, this is something that we can kind of explore more as we continue to do this. So, yeah. Great. Now we can kind of paint textures. We can add different accents. It's a little bit more like Photoshop at this point. You can kind of make it look like whatever you want. So now let's talk about actually creating a world that you can view and it's interesting. So we already have what looks like a pretty cool little area. So let's move this camera here. So oops, let's move it so we can sort of see this from a little bit farther away. Cool. So you notice that we've got this little world with snowmen by the lake. We can now move that snowman a little bit. Cool, great. In fact, let's take a minute to apply that texture to our albedo, which, you know, I don't love the fact that it's just white. And one thing we can do is we can actually click that little button on the left of the albedo to pull up this texture selector, and we can apply that snow to it, which is really cool. We can even play a little bit with the you know, how metallic it is, which is kind of how shiny it is, like how much like a metal it behaves, how smooth it is, which it's not very smooth. Metal snow is very, very kind of diffuse, and we're also going to ultimately add a normal map, but we can't use these yet because that's not really what, you know, we don't have a normal map for that particular snow yet. So let's get rid of this guy. Cool. It's not emissive, but is it? But we can talk a little bit about what emissive means in the future. And then, yeah, that's about it for now. Let's get rid of reflections as well to make it speed up a little bit. And we don't really need specular highlights, but let's keep them because it's we don't want that either. Great. So now our snowman looks a little bit more like snow because the materials that we're using look a little bit more like snow. Great. Cool. So let's pull up here. So now let's talk about making more of a world. So we can move our snowman like we were showing you before. Move this guy around a little bit. Seems a little bit large compared to the rest of the environment. So how about we make him a little bit smaller? So let's make him half as big. And we can do that at the top level component of the character. And so now you can see it's a little bit too small. So let's make him a nice 0.75 of his former stature. Great. So that's pretty small, big enough, not too big. Perfect. And yeah, keep in mind that when you're dealing with this stuff, if you're down at the, you know, now he's already above the ground, and so we kind of want to bring him back down to the ground so that he's kind of just a little bit, you know, touching the ground. Cool. To duplicate the snowman, we don't really, we don't want to have just one. We want to have many. So what we can do is we can take, we can collapse this down, and you can either use Control D, which will duplicate, which is a nice kind of feature, or we can right click and duplicate, which will just duplicate one exactly where it is. So now we've got 3 of these guys, and we can start to rotate them around, you know, maybe give them just a little bit of funkiness. You'll notice also that in the editor, it will have it'll add a number, but you can rename them if you want to, you know, Jim, Bob, and then this is, I don't know, Monica, whatever. We're equal here. So let's go and maybe make this a little bit, make this one a little bit smaller in kind of a funny way. Right, so these all have their own set of parameters independent of each other. So changing one will not change the other. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that, where changing one will change all of them, but that's for a different time. Notice I kind of changed the sizing of everything, and so now I really want to make sure that they're all, you know, intercepting the ground, like I was saying before. Cool. So it's no longer intercepting the ground, so we got to bring them down. So feel free to really get comfortable with isometric versus perspective view, right? You can see how much of a difference it makes. This is what your game will look like. This is what's called isometric, which will mean that it's an orthographic projection, so that distance doesn't affect it versus perspective, which will affect the way you see things. But orthographic and these are very good for positioning things in a way that makes sense, right? Whereas this is much better at, oh, this looks cool. Great. Nice. And notice, no matter what I do here, the camera view of the game stays the same. So, on. Now, this is the part that I guarantee will not work because the standard asset stuff isn't quite there. But let's try. And if we have to, we can fix it, or I can show you how to kind of pull in assets from a different project, which I kind of fixed while we were in an intermission earlier. So what we will need is this first-person controller that we added before. So if you go in here, you'll see in the assets that we kind of imported earlier, here is the first-person controller. And what we want is we want to go into the prefabs piece, because the prefabs are effectively in Unity kind of a combination of a bunch of different things that were previously put there by somebody else. And so now we just drag that, the first-person controller, into our scene. And that's it. Ignore. Great. So now we've got a first-person controller. And what we want to do is move it so that it makes sense. You can notice that it already kind of took over the camera, which is good. But if we play, we're going to have all these compiler errors. So I'm going to try to debug these, and I'm going to fail, but we'll try anyways. So let's open this up. By double-clicking on one of the errors, it'll pop up a IDE. We'll talk more about this in the next lecture of how to code, but you have a couple of choices. You can either pull up using Visual Studio, which 2017 works, 2019 will work. The writer was brought to my attention by another one of the adjunct faculty this semester, Sean. And what's really cool about it, it's made by JetBrains, really high quality software those guys make. And you'll find that it'll show like, oh, here are all of the issues with your code, and it'll kind of bring that all up to you. So there's a bunch of errors, and then we kind of have to figure out what the errors are. Do Bob cycle, ambiguous invocation. So clearly, do Bob cycle. Go to where are you? Let's see if we can find the errors, and if not, I'm gonna time box this to like a few minutes. I'm both using a new IDE, and also I have no idea what's wrong with this thing. So I know this is missing. Cannot resolve cross-platform input manager. So we're missing this particular component, which we were idiots when we imported the assets, apparently. So that's probably what's wrong. So let me import again. So this one's on me. And now, again, we don't want the sample scenes. We don't want everything. We already have the character, the first-person character stuff. So it won't let us get that, apparently. What we do need is the cross-platform input. which let's try to find that. Let's add the camera stuff, since that seems like it's possibly useful. Here we go. Here's the cross-platform stuff that we need. And I don't know that we need anything else. So let's import those. So once done, apparently we haven't added utility either, so that's what that looks like down there. So let's, again, we don't want all the sample scenes and we don't want everything. Let's add utility, which will probably be at the bottom of V. Utility. Right. And now it's compiling. And we have no errors now. Great. So really, it was me being a little bit too intense. So I'm going to go and I'm going to run the game. If I hit play, boom. Now you notice I'm in the game. If I move my mouse around, I'm looking around. I can walk. I can even run. I can jump. And I can even bump into stuff. And how does this all work without any coding is amazing. I can even stand right on top of the arm. I can even climb up to the top of the mountain, but not all the way. But pretty good. And I can, you know, if anybody who's played Rust probably can appreciate this bug. Great. So to get out, I do have my mouse somewhere. Apparently not. There's my mouse. Cool. I'm gonna get rid of this maximize on play. So there you go. Now you can actually go and experience your world. And you can mess around with different ways to do that. So, and now that we have this first-person controller, the main camera isn't really fulfilling much of a purpose, so we can just delete it. Great. So now it's on you. Thank you for watching me kind of bumble through that. Now it's up to you to kind of create your own snowman. You feel free to use any 3D game objects, whatever kind of scene you want to create. Play with different textures, download things from Google Images as you'd like. And, you know, sculpt your terrain, create different worlds. You can also use different kinds of light sources, which I'd love to kind of show you before we move on. And but for the most part, you know, you have all the tools. So before we jump onto the rest of this exercise, because I'm looking at these images and I'm seeing these point lights and other things, feel free to go crazy, but I want to talk a little bit about the differences between different lights. So you have the sun here, but you can create other lights as well. So we can create a bunch of different lights, like directional, point, spotlight, area light, reflection probes. What are all these things? We'll talk about all of them, but let's start with I just want to talk a little bit about point lights because they're used all over the place. So here you'll notice that now I have a light, and what's meant by a point light is that it has only a point. It's almost like a mathematical concept of a point. So you can kind of notice I'm moving it. Let me move it in front of this this one snowman, and you'll see that point light. And let me change the color. So I can change the color of the point light to, let's say, blue. And I will notice this blue, eerie light sort of floating around because I'm moving it in this bottom corner. You can see those updates in real time. So point lights, unlike direction lights, you know, have sort of a fall off. As you can see, the light is much brighter at its sort of center than anywhere else, and it kind of falls off, much like a real light would. unlike a direction light, where the sort of approximation is that everything is the same distance from the light source as the sun would be because it's so far away that everything gets the same amount of light regardless. But a point light, like imagine a candle or a light bulb, things are at different distances from that light source, so they kind of fall off by the geometry of that, which we'll talk about in a future lecture. So yeah, these are really nice. You also have spotlights. You can actually change the light type after you've created it. You can also make this into a spotlight, which is kind of fun. And spotlights are kind of notable in that their direction does matter. So I'm kind of doing this sort of too far away for anyone to see, but you'll notice now that the light source direction, you can see this little dot here, the light source direction does matter. So if I rotate the light, the spotlight will change. Now you'll notice there's no shadows, there's none of that, and we'll talk about how to add shadows, the whole subject of itself. But now you kind of know almost everything you need to know to create some of these images. You'll notice other things like particle effects, more complicated texturing. So you'll notice in this particular image in the bottom right, there is what kind of looks like reflection. So I would kind of question why a snowman should have reflection, right? So you can play with materials to really give the feel of your scene to that object. And I really encourage you to play around and kind of see what all those little knobs and things do. So finally, and this is what you will be submitting to the Dropbox. I'm not going to go explicitly through the steps here, but I'll kind of show you how to do it. Now that I have my project, I can go to the build settings, and I can choose, okay, I don't know if you can see this, it's quite small, Windows x86 64, everything's 64-bit now. I don't know who's using a 32-bit computer anymore. And that's really it. And you can hit build here. You can hit build and run. So let's do that. Let's do build and run. And I'm going to save this to my, Snowman demo folder. There's no reason not to. And now it's building. And it's building the player. If you see me looking over to the left a lot, that's just I'm checking my recording software, making sure that I'm still recording or nothing stupid's going on. Or I'm also checking Discord over here on my left screen as well. Great. So now it is done. Whoop. Where did it go? So, not sure where it went, but let me show you how to find it. So, here is my snowman thing. Where did it go? We're still building it. Let's do it again. See what happens. Let's save it here. Let's kind of look at what it's doing. Okay. Build path contains, I see. All right, so we learned something today. When you do a build and run, let's see if the lectures actually told me I shouldn't do this. Right. So don't do what I just did. Make sure that you create a new folder, which is, call it finished or target or PC build, and select this folder. And now it will build into that because it cannot conflict with an existing Visual Studio setting. So you saw there were a couple of errors down there, and it told me to do a better job, which is what I'm trying to do. I'm doing my best. You know, this is all new to me. Hopefully, you guys appreciate that. Great. So now you'll notice over here, oh, and it launches it for me. And now I'm playing the game. Cool. Cool. I'm on top of the snowman. So, of course, that's what you got to do. And there's no way to actually exit this game, so be aware of that. Great. When you submit the project, please submit all of this stuff. If you don't give me one of those things, I don't think it works. So make sure that you submit everything unless otherwise. Yeah. And so yeah, please just zip up that thing, upload it, and this first assignment is due by the start of class on Tuesday. So like I was saying, at 9 a.m. Pacific time, when I'm posting all of these lectures, that's when I expect this to be done by then. Yeah, so please have like 3 snowmen. Each one should have kind of a unique modeling, a couple of new things. Don't do what I did, which is boring. Sculpt your terrain, use different textures, bonus points for using funky textures from funky places. Especially good, bonus points if you use normal maps and you figure out how to make materials look realistic to the kind of material they are. So snow obviously doesn't reflect. Rocks have bumps to them. Can you figure out how to do that before we talk about it in this course? Show some design aesthetic, right? Like here's a little village with whatever. And please get the first-person character controller to work, and put the start position of the camera not like off the screen and falls off the world. Just as a pet peeve of mine and in general, if any one of your projects falls through the ground, that's like a big deal. Please make sure that that doesn't happen, especially at first. If like you start the game and you fall through the ground, that is like the worst experience. I'm sure anybody who's played a video game knows what I'm talking about. Don't let this happen to you. Don't be that group or person or whatever. Great. So yeah, that's it. Please take that first quiz in my courses. It should be available as soon as you see this. And as I mentioned, read all of the lectures, all of the assigned readings by the beginning, by the next time I post lectures next week. And the first exercise is due by the beginning of class. So yeah, thanks again. I hope you guys enjoyed that to some degree. Thank you for putting up with me figuring things out as I go along with the first time teaching this course. All right, cheers, and have a great week. Bye.